All right, so in this video, we're going to continue talking about the spread of the Reformation. So we're going to look at two more variations of Christianity, kind of continuing the explosion of new ideas about Christianity that Luther opened the door for with the publishing of the 95 Theses. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about more Protestant faiths. More Protestant faiths. So last time we looked at how Zwingli's religion looked different, or Zwingli's Christianity looked different than Luther's. We talked about the Calvinist church. So what we're going to look at today are two more types of Protestantism. So the first one of these, we're not going to spend much time on this one, but it is kind of an interesting interpretation of a lot of Christian ideas, and this is the idea of Anabaptism. So one thing that Catholics and Lutherans and Calvinists can agree on is that they all hate Anabaptists. So the central idea of Anabaptism is that you are opposed to the idea of infant baptism. So it's pretty common for babies to be baptized in a church. There's a whole ceremony for it. What Anabaptists believed is that you have to actively choose this as an adult. Babies can't choose to be baptized. They're just baptized. And what the Anabaptists are centering their ideas on is that you have to choose this. God gave people free will, and so you have to choose to be baptized. So they push for adult baptism. You have to choose this. So this is all centered around the idea of free will, and babies don't have free will. Now, most of the other Protestant faiths and the Catholic Church, the reason they opposed this is because you were being baptized twice. So they're opposed by others because these people are often baptized twice, which you can't do. So they don't like these guys because they're advocating people be baptized again, which is against what most of those other faiths believe in. They also are opposed, so the Anabaptists are also opposed to take oaths or serve in government roles. So they're taking, I believe, a part of the Sermon on the Mount, and they're taking it literally, where Jesus says, "Don't take oaths or serve in a government," and they're taking it literally, and they won't take oaths or serve in government roles. Now, this makes them easy targets for government authorities because they're not going to serve in the military. They refuse to take like loyalty oaths. So they can be arrested and put on trial for treason against the state, and that usually leads to execution. So even though there are religious reasons why Catholics and Lutherans and Calvinists might not like Anabaptists, it's usually the government that comes after them because they're not fulfilling their rights and responsibilities as a person who lives in that country. And so usually they were executed, and kind of derisively they were drowned, which was called the third baptism. Just twisting the knife a little bit more. Many Anabaptists migrated to North America to escape persecution. And we know these people better as the Mennonites. Two N's in Mennonites. The Mennonites, who then, over time, we know them best as the Amish. And the thing we know about the Amish is that they reject technology. Because it makes work easier. And work is good for you. So they reject technology because it makes work easier. And they want people to work. Work is good for you. But the more expansive Protestant idea is the Anglican Church. So the Anglican Church, otherwise known as the Church of England. Now, the Anglican Church is a really, really good example of the state, so the government, adopting a religion to gain independence from the Pope. And many Protestant churches and governments kind of merged. And we're going to see this a lot in Northern Europe. So the Scandinavians, the Swedish, the Danish, all of them are going to adopt a Protestant church. And then the church and the state are going to kind of merge into one thing. So this is a very Protestant thing where there is a government leader who is also at the same time the head of a church. So let's see how we ended up this way in England. So prior to 1530, England was reliably Catholic. In fact, Henry VIII, who is the hero or the villain of this story, depending on how you look at it, Henry VIII was given the title Defender of the Faith by the Pope because he defended the Pope from attacks from Martin Luther. So England was Catholic. Henry VIII was very Catholic. In fact, Henry VIII was kind of a minor player in Luther's Reformation, in that he openly denounced what Luther was doing and defended the Pope against Luther's attacks. So England was Catholic, and Henry VIII was reliably Catholic. The story starts, however, with Henry VIII's marriage, his first marriage. So Henry VIII, who is the King of England, was married to Catherine of Aragon. So Catherine of Aragon, which is a Spanish province. She was older than Henry. And she was previously married to Henry's older brother, who had died. Now, I bring this up for a particular reason, because for Henry to get married to his brother's widow, he needed special permission from the Pope. But because Henry and the Pope were close, and England was Catholic and Henry was Catholic, the Pope really had no issue giving this special permission. Now, this marriage only produced a daughter. The marriage only produced a daughter. Her name is Mary. We will come back to Mary in a few minutes. So the marriage only produced a daughter. The fact that this marriage only produced a daughter was a problem for Henry. Daughters could inherit the throne, but it was complicated. I believe it took an act of parliament for a daughter to inherit the throne, and you'd rather have a son because a son could just take the throne. So sons just inherited the throne, and that's what Henry wanted. Because despite all of Henry's issues, and he has a lot of issues that we're going to talk about here, it does seem like Henry wanted to prevent a civil war in England after he died. And so he wanted to have a son to prevent any possible conflict from arising after Henry's death. So in this one part of the story, excuse me, Henry does seem to be thinking about the future of England. Uh, and that's pretty much the only praise I'm going to give Henry here. Uh, Henry believed that he only had a daughter because the marriage was cursed. He believed he should not have married Catherine. He believed that because she was older, that she could only produce a daughter. He believed that because she was married to his brother, the marriage was cursed. All of those things. He believed that only having this one daughter from the marriage was a problem. It was a curse put on him. Now, he was also, at this time, having an affair with one of Catherine's servants. Well, not a servant, a lady in waiting. So a member of Catherine's court. Her name was Anne Boleyn. And this is probably more of a reason for what's about to happen than anything else. But here's what happens next. So Henry asks the Pope for an annulment to his marriage to Catherine. So he asks the Pope to annul his marriage. And because the Pope and Henry are close, he figures the Pope will say yes, and he would then be free to marry Anne Boleyn and have lots of sons. The problem with that is that the Pope says no. The Pope says no to Henry. And this goes back to the sacking of Rome in 1527. So this is all happening, I believe, in 1529. So the Pope says no to Henry, and the reason he says no goes back to the sacking of Rome in 1527. Remember, this was done by Spanish soldiers. Now, these Spanish soldiers kidnapped the Pope. And even though the King of Spain, who we'll talk about in depth in a few days, Charles V, rescues the Pope and punishes the soldiers, the Pope is still, we'll say, wary of angering Charles. Now, how does this factor into Catherine? Well, Catherine is Charles's favorite aunt. And the Pope figures that he is in place right now. He's in charge of the church because Charles wants him there. And he's not going to go anger the guy that secured his position by annulling his aunt's marriage. So he's just not going to get Charles mad at him by doing Henry this favor. So I know it's kind of complicated and there are a couple of threads there, but basically, Charles secured the Pope's job, and the Pope doesn't want to make Charles angry. And this is an opportunity that could make Charles angry. So the Pope just says, I'm not going to get involved. Henry, you've got to stay married to Catherine. So at this point, Henry needs to start thinking outside the box. So he needs to start thinking of new ideas. And an idea is presented to him by the small Protestant population of England. And the idea is that you can gain independence from the Pope by adopting Protestantism. And independence from the Pope is exactly what Henry is looking for. So slowly, but inevitably, Henry and his advisors pass a number of bills through Parliament that separate England from the Catholic Church. So the end result of this, the piece of law that effectively severs England from the church, is called the Act of Supremacy. And this was passed in 1534. So the Act of Supremacy creates a new church and this church is almost entirely the same as the Catholic Church with a few key differences. So here are these few key differences. The King of England is in charge. Divorce is legal. All of the church's stuff is now the king's stuff. And when I say the church, I mean the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church's stuff now belongs to the king, who is the head of this new church. the king gets to appoint his own bishops. And the language of the church is English, not Latin. So English is the language of this church, not Latin. So the Bible will be printed in Latin now, or in Latin and English. So the long story of this is that at this point, Henry is now free to marry Anne Boleyn. And again, that marriage only produces a daughter. So come up here and continue this just a little bit. So Henry now marries Anne, and we get another daughter. Elizabeth. Now, Henry tries as he might to have a son with Anne, but she doesn't produce a son either. So Anne is tried for treason and executed. He then gets another wife, and finally has a son. His name is Edward, and he will succeed his father. So he will become Edward the Sixth in 1547. His third wife, Henry's third wife, dies, and then he has a fourth wife who he divorces, a fifth wife who dies, and then a sixth wife who survives him. So Henry VIII has 6 wives and 3 children that are legitimate children. I'm sure he had children with other people that are not legitimate, but he had 3 legitimate children. So when Henry dies in 1547, his one son, Edward VI, becomes king. But Edward is a kind of a sick child. He's not well. And he dies when he's a teenager. I think he's in his, I think he's like 17 or 18 when he dies. And when he dies, his oldest sister takes the throne. And when I say that she takes the throne, she basically steals it. Right before Edward dies, he names who his heir is going to be, and she is Queen of England for about 6 days before Mary's supporters arrest her and execute her. So when I say Mary takes the throne, she basically steals it from Edward's chosen successor. But we'll pick this story back up when we start talking about new monarchies, probably next week. So until then, we're going to stop here. Mary is the Queen of England, and we'll pick that story up then. So until we start talking about new monarchies, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.